Good afternoon, Sean here, Mountains Garage. Welcome back to our extremely detailed, very slow moving series on building two Turbo 400s for myself. One with a TH475 lower gear train that we assembled and installed yesterday. And today the parts truck showed up and brought me the second ATI output shaft that I wanted. And my used lower gear unit angular cut that I'm going to install on the Turbo 400, and some other surprises that I'm going to be putting in that one to make it stronger than this one. And this one, if you believe the ads, that's how I find my recipe for building transmissions. I go online and see all the ones for sale, what they contain, and decide what I want. And that pretty much determines, they have a good idea what power level they can sustain. So that's my guide. Yesterday I referenced an article by Sonax about Turbo 400 end play. There's also another excellent article. It's a two-part series in Gears magazine, but it's online. If you search for Turbo 400 end play, you'll probably find these articles. That's how I got to them. They're both very detailed. They give some part numbers of how at least they did it in the article, because as usual, there's more than one way to rollerize a Turbo 400. I'm sure different manufacturers have their own opinions and ways of doing things. That's not uncommon in anything, really. So I'm going to show you what I have here in front of me today and what I'm going to use. I was excited to unbox and disassemble my used angular cut lower gear train. Like I mentioned, I'm replacing the stock output shaft which it had, which is a fine two-wheel drive passenger car output shaft, with this ATI unit, brand new, which also showed up at the same time. This has a aftermarket main shaft, used but in fine shape. The whole gear train itself is in great shape. The only modification is I placed this factory thrust washer, which would be between the carriers. And yesterday we replaced it with the output thrust washer from the back of the output shaft. We put a bearing here now, so this was left over and we put it over here. So in this case, they machined a pocket, actually through the pins and everything, but I've seen this done, so it's somewhat normal. Sometimes they weld it also, weld the pins in, but this one is not. It's been run, it hasn't moved, it seems fine. And they machined it for a TH400 pump bearing. This goes in the back of the case, but I've checked it against the one that's stuck on the sun gear. I can see where I could force a new one over there without damaging it, but in this case it's captive. I can't lose it. And as long as I install that tape it side down, I can't put it in backwards, right? So if I can do this looking through the camera, that fits right into the pocket. I'm not sure how much of an upgrade it is when you're replacing a piece of plastic. I mean, obviously, this thing will last for decades. At some horsepower level, maybe it's a liability. Again, I put a metal thrust washer in there just because I don't really like plastic, but the Turbo 400 engineers knew what they were doing. In this case, somebody took it to the next level. It's not an uncommon modification, but it's the only one done to the lower unit. So, I'm going to assemble it. Off camera, it came with a center support that had a steel piston, so I've installed an aluminum piston, and I put in my favorite style spring retainer that completely hides the springs, only because I had it laying here. And wouldn't you know, I found another one this morning while I was looking for something else. Assembled and lowered into the HD Pontiac case. Now let's get to some more fun stuff. You can't have a complete conversation about the intermediate clutches without also talking about the direct drum. For the TH475, I'm going to use a 4L80E drum with a 34 element sprag, the 4L80E width sprag race to engage a 4-clutch intermediate pack directly out of a 4L80E also, along with a pressure plate, also 4L80E parts. I machined a Turbo 400 piston to accept 6 90 thousandths steels and 6 88 thousandths clutches. Full size for a direct drum and a stock Turbo 400 pressure plate. I'm definitely at the limit of how far you can cut and still not have the first steel slip underneath the lug. It's fine, but I wouldn't want to go any more than this. I drilled a 1/16 bleed hole to prevent centrifugal ply at high RPM, and put a spiral lock on to retain the shield for the sprag. Also in my used collection today, I bought a steel Pro Mod. I use that term loosely, but they call it the Pro Mod drum. It has a 36 element sprag, a much larger sprag race. It's almost an inch wide. A spiral lock. I need to drill a bleed hole because there isn't one. It has a machined Turbo 400 aluminum piston, cut for 6 77 thousandths steels and 6 77 thousandths clutches. Thinner than the Turbo 400, but they left more meat on the piston. And these are, they look burnt, but they're actually nitrated, I guess. They're all black. They're all in perfect shape. That should work just fine. I built this drum with trans brake springs, but I'm going to use the ones that came in the ATD kit and save these for something else. And when I get the second ATD valve body, I'll do the same. These are somebody's trans brake springs, I'm sure. And I'll save them and put in the ones that came with the valve body. For the Turbo 400 Intermediate, it came with a 5 clutch pack, which is pretty common when you buy the Pro Mod drum, and a thinner pressure plate. The actual stack height, despite having 5 clutches, is identical to my 4L80E stock setup. So I know it's going to fit in the case. It uses a combination of 60 thousandths steels and 80 thousandths clutches. And I believe they're a C6 spline. They're bigger than a Turbo 400. A actual Pro Mod drum, I believe, would be considered the aluminum version. They make a steel insert where your seals ride. They make them without the steel insert too, but if you're shopping for an aluminum drum and you're going to drop $1,000, get the aluminum drum with the steel insert. These steel drums go for around $500 or $600. And both intermediate clutch packs will be held in by a 90 thousandths heavy duty snap ring and the case saver that we talked about during case prep. So now I'm going to put them in and air check both transmissions for intermediate clutch apply. Here's the 5 clutch stacked up in the TH400. I'm going to take a rubber tipped blowgun up through the middle of the center support bolt with just a little bit of air. You actually have to take the rubber tip blowgun off to release it. Looks good to me. Inside the Turbo 400, which has all the lugs, there's no void. All I can do is stop the snap ring ends on a lug and leave the gap in between because I want to support solid snap ring over here. If I put the gap of the snap ring over here, I'm really not supporting as much as I would be in this configuration, in my opinion. So next is the case saver here. Here in the plastic vent transmission, there's a void in the case with lugs, so I put my gap there. Same reason, I want to support the snap ring as best as possible. The case saver prevents the breakage of the lugs with a hard 1-2 shift. To install the case saver, I'm going to put a drop of Loctite on the bolt that goes up through the servo hole. I'm going to put some sealer, RTV, on the threads of the bolt as I shove it through and under the head of the nut, which is on the outside, because I don't want to leak. I tighten the shouldered bolt that comes up through the servo first, and that pulls it down into position. I wouldn't want to tighten the big bolt through the case and then have a gap there and try to pull that down and break that little bolt off. So tighten the small one first, and then I tighten the through bolt through the case, wipe off my mess. One case saver installed. This is a good comparison as to how much bigger this sprag and race is compared to the Turbo 400 4L80E size. I try to keep a couple steps ahead of myself, having parts on hand and cleaned and painted whatever has to happen to do the actual installation of them. This pump half is going in the 475 along with its mating half, and believe it or not, that's one of the Swamp Monster transmission pumps of the Pontiacs that I stripped. I've got over 12 hours in cleaning it initially in the Rotojet, in the Evaporest, back in the Rotojet, into the ultrasonic cleaner, and now here it is, painted and ready to assemble. And this was the easy half. The half with the pressure regulator was more of a challenge, but I think I've made it usable. All right, we've come to the point in this journey where the paths are going to go like this. The Turbo 400 over there, I don't have a valve body for it, and most of the steps from this point forward require the parts that come in the valve body kit. For the 475, I do. It's sitting right on the bench, and I'm going to continue and finish this one. When I get the other valve body, we'll work on the 400 once again. Today was interesting. I got to see the used parts that I bought, and it worked out. It's a gamble. You know, when you're looking at a picture online, you know the deal. Until it's in your hand, you don't know what you have. So I think I got an excellent deal on used parts. Used parts aren't for everybody, but the majority of the transmissions we're talking about, I don't know what percentage is actually reused, but you have your normal service parts and you have your 40 and 50-year-old parts. So that's just the way it is. In this case, I introduced the more used stuff, no different than if I went out and bought a core, other than maybe the price. But I think I did pretty well for what this would have cost new. The steel 36 element drum, the main shaft, I haven't showed you yet, but it also came with a forward drum with an input shaft. So that stuff adds up, like I mentioned, in a hurry, because I had to buy it for this one. So brand new. That's it for today. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll catch you soon. Have a great weekend.